Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's talk. My name is Chris Verger, and tonight I'm speaking with Dr. Tina Piers from the UK. Welcome, Dr. Piers.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Chris.
It's great to have you. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I'd love you to just start off by explaining a bit of your background in medicine and your studies leading up to what you're doing now with long COVID and mast cell activation. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I've had a bit of a sort of an interesting, diverse history in medicine. So I started off in general practice, and I did general practice for 7 years part time whilst I had my 3 children. And then I decided to concentrate in women's health, and I became a consultant in contraception and reproductive health. And I ran the contraceptive services for Surrey for 24 years, which I loved. It was fantastic, really enjoyed that. And that was working within the NHS, both of those jobs. Then I became a menopause specialist. But in 2016, my career took an interesting turn because my youngest daughter, who had been unwell all her life, became very unwell in 2016. And we couldn't find anybody to help us, basically. So I had to try and sort of work out what was going on. And I did come to the conclusion that she had histamine intolerance. There wasn't that much on the internet at that time, so it was a bit tricky to work out then what to do about it. And I finally found a fantastic professor, Vic Kular in London, who is a urogynecologist who knew all about it. And he helped me and guided us, and he became a bit of a mentor for me in helping other patients with this condition, really. So with that interest, I was still seeing contraception patients, and I started diagnosing maybe 3, 4, 5 people a week with mast cell activation syndrome and histamine intolerance, who I was seeing for other things. I was seeing them for contraception, for example, and taking a full history to work out which contraceptives they might be interested in and be safe for them to take, and would unearth all these other symptoms that these patients were suffering and struggling with, and maybe had been unwell with all their lives, or certainly for decades, many of them. And it was screaming at me that they had mast cell activation as well. And so I started giving them some general advice and help with that, and they'd come back and they'd be better. So that was really interesting and encouraging. And of course, my daughter became very much better, which was great, but it took quite a while. It's not a quick process, as many of you will know. And then along came COVID. I then became a menopause specialist, actually, left the NHS, just concentrated more on the older women's health, and continuing to see patients with MCAS who would find their way to my clinic by word of mouth mostly. And then along came COVID, and it was very interesting. In the beginning of spring 2020, I was reading as much information as I could possibly find in all the journals and all the publications to try and learn as much as possible about this condition that we hadn't seen before. And I came across a publication by some Italians talking about some post-mortem findings in some patients who had sadly died with COVID. And in the post-mortem findings, they said, well, the pathology is very interesting, and we can't really work out what's going on. There's hyperinflammation, there's some clotting, there's some bleeding, and there's the breakdown of membranes. And when I read that, to me, that screamed mast cell activation syndrome, and that the mast cells had released these chemicals, the cytokines, which had caused those changes in the lungs. So I felt that patients weren't dying so much from COVID as their reaction to the infection. And they were overreacting to the infection. And it was this overzealous reaction of their immune system that was causing the hyperinflammation and the problems in the lungs. And then ultimately, it killed some of the people. So I then thought, well, if that's the case, then we need to treat treat COVID with mast cell activation kind of treatments. And lo and behold, that worked very, very well. And patients started to get better from COVID within 24 hours, sometimes even faster than that. Certainly by 48 hours, they'd be very much better. And that was using simple over-the-counter preparations, nothing fancy. And so that was very interesting and exciting. And it's worth saying here that 20% of the population have got mast cell activation syndrome. It's estimated that it's 20%. So it's a lot of people. And I think they're the ones who are getting into difficulty with COVID. At the same time, some of my colleagues in America, who I didn't know at that time, were thinking the same. And they wrote and published a paper on September the 10th in 2020 in a journal called the International Journal for Infectious Diseases. And it was Dr. Lawrence Afrin and Molderings and Weinstock. And their paper was entitled something like, "Is the hyperinflammation in COVID something to do with the mast cells or associated with mast cell activation?" And so they'd noticed the same things, really. In the summer of 2020, I noticed a lot of information about long COVID. And people were saying, we don't know what to do with these patients. We don't know how to treat them. We don't quite know what's going on in their bodies. And I was thinking, well, that sounds to me like it's post-viral syndrome, which is what people with mast cell activation get. So therefore, it was actually a BBC journalist who drew it to my attention, because she had heard me on a podcast talking about MCAS. And she contacted me and said when she heard that, she felt that she had MCAS, but now she had long COVID. And that's sort of piqued my interest. And she got me onto BBC Look East television on the news. It took a while to get me on there, but it was October by the time I went on there. And I was given 3 minutes, and I said that I was looking into long COVID. And if people with long COVID could download a free app, they could put their profiles or their symptoms into the app, and I could look and see if it looks like mast cell activation. And they did that. And then 2,200 people did in about 48 hours. It was amazing. And I was able to look at their profiles, and it showed that they did indeed have the same profile as people with mast cell activation syndrome. So that's when I felt, first of all, morally obliged to open a clinic for long COVID, because I felt I could help this population of people. And also interested because I wanted to see, had the COVID caused the MCAS, or had they got previously undiagnosed and untreated MCAS that the COVID had just really exacerbated. So I opened a clinic on the 1st of November 2020. And the rest is history, really. So that was a very long way of me describing what I now do. But so I see menopausal ladies, I see patients with MCAS, and I see patients with long COVID and patients with vaccine injuries.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing. It's very fascinating to me. I came across, like I mentioned before we started the call officially, came across your interview with John Campbell or Dr. John Campbell. And I was interested to ask, I guess, in terms of, I don't know if layperson is the right word, but a non-medical person like myself who's just battling long COVID, how would you explain a mast cell? So MAST, for those listeners who don't know what it is. And yeah, what is a mast cell, and why is it important in our biology or our body? Yeah.
Okay, good question. So mast cells are everywhere. They tend to be interstitial, which means they're in the tissues rather than in the bloodstream. And they're like the body's first defense against any foreign invaders. So any pathogens that are trying to get into the body. And therefore, they're positioned just like the bouncers in a club, just inside the door. So they're under the skin, all of our skin. They are in our nasal passages, our sinuses, in our mouths, our throats, our gullet, our stomach, all the way through our gut. They line the bladder and the vagina and so on. So they're very, very important. And the lungs. And they are there sitting, waiting to defend us against anything that shouldn't come in. And when they detect a foreign pathogen, let's say a pathogen, they react by releasing over 1,000 different chemicals, and these are called cytokines. And everyone may be familiar with the cytokine storm that resulted when people caught COVID. And so this is the mast cells there are some other cells that release cytokines too, but predominantly it's the mast cells. They also line the nerves, and that can cause some inflammation of the nerves when they're activated, which can cause neurological symptoms. They also line the blood-brain barrier, and they are supposed to stop things going into the brain and passing through and blocking them at the blood-brain barrier, because we obviously don't want things going into our brain that shouldn't be there. And so they are very, very important. They are everywhere, and they can last an awfully long time. So they can last up to 2 to 4 years. To replace all your mast cells can take 2 to 4 years. And that's significant because if your mast cells are in a very reactive environment where they've been reacting a lot, they communicate with each other and they get a bit jumpy. And you want to calm everything down so that new mast cells coming into the environment are a little bit better behaved. But it can take 2 to 4 years to replace all those mast cells. So in a nutshell, that's what they do. Now, one of the things they release is histamine. And histamine is very important. It has a very important role to play. It's a neurotransmitter. So it actually transmits the signals along the nerves. It's important for our circadian rhythm. It keeps us awake when we should be awake. It also is important for producing digestion of histamine in our food. So it's released by the stomach, and so it's important that So we know. I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused here. It's important the circadian rhythm, the cognitive function, for neurotransmission, and for our immune system, basically. And 70% of our immune system is in our gut. So our gut is full of mast cells, lining the walls of the gut. So the problem comes when 20% of the population, we believe, have got an abnormal genetic predisposition to abnormal super reactive mast cells. So they react to things they should really ignore, and then it becomes a problem. And mast cell activation has been fairly recently, I say recently, described. So it wasn't in the medical books when I was at medical school, and I think it still isn't, which is a problem. But it was first described in the 80s, and then it was given a name in the 1990s. And it was only in 2007, which isn't that long ago, that 3 case studies were first published in the journals for doctors to read about. And therefore, it's not on the radar of most doctors. And most doctors, like me, had half an hour to an hour of lectures on mast cells and allergies when we were at medical school. And I remember being told mast cells can misbehave as mastocytosis, which is a sort of overproduction of abnormal mast cells, and that can be a precancerous condition. And it's so rare, they said to us, you will never see it in your whole career. It's that rare. So as a medical student with so much to learn, what you do is you think, okay, I don't have to worry about that one, and you stop thinking about them. And it's never brought up again. And you're taught a little bit about allergies, and then that's it. And we're not taught about nutrition, which is, I know, beggars belief, but we weren't taught anything about nutrition. And we weren't taught about diets, and so it just passed. That was it. So you didn't know anything about it, and I suspect that is the case still. However, 20% of the patients who are out there of the population, and probably a higher percentage of the patients, because these are people who have chronic inflammation, so they're going to be turning up a lot in the cardiology clinics, with the neurologist, with the endocrinologist, with the etc., in the GP surgeries, and often they get no answers because the doctors haven't learnt about this. There are 3 things that are involved with mast cell activation, and that is that there is usually inflammation. So anything like bronchitis, sinusitis, etc., usually has mast cells behind it, causing inflammation. And then it's plus or minus Oh, and the inflammation can be in any system, as you can imagine, because the mast cells are everywhere. So plus or minus allergies, intolerances and allergies to things, and plus or minus dystrophisms, which means overgrowth of tissues. These are not cancerous, but they can just be awkward, and included in that is things like cysts, so polycystic ovaries, cysts in the liver, etc., are thought to be because of mast cell activation. And people they always have inflammation, and they can have either of the others as well or not as part of the syndrome. So yeah, that's what it is.
Incredible. Thank you. I was going to ask, in terms of, you say they produce histamines, and you've explained that it's an important part of the body, and how our bodies work. I've had a history of allergies and asthma since I was little, and I wonder if you could. I basically was going to ask, does an antihistamine fix mast cells as an issue? Because I know it's blocking receptors that receive the histamine, so like your symptoms die down if it's asthma, or if you get I'm allergic to cats, for example. So if I touch a cat and rub my face, it's like I'm going to blow up like a balloon, and I'm itchy, red eyes. So I wash my hands if I ever touch a cat, which I love animals, which is difficult. So what do you think? Well, if you wanted to just to dive into a bit about antihistamines and what is their role, and do you recommend that to people with long COVID and or vaccine injuries?
Yes. So what's happening, I think, Chris, is that we know that the virus, COVID, the virus, really, really activates the mast cells. And it actually enters the mast cells through not just the ACE2 receptor, but also through the histamine receptors. And it then causes this cytokine storm. And it seems to do this really, really well in people who have slightly abnormal mast cells. And so then people who've got this condition will have a much bigger reaction to the virus, and they will release a lot more histamine, and plus the others. Okay, so there are 1,000 cytokines. We don't even know what some of them do, but we do know that they are very potent in very tiny amounts. So it doesn't require much of an increase release of one of them to cause some problems for the patient, some symptoms. So these histamines are being released. It's causing inflammation. It can cause inflammation in the gut. That's often, those symptoms are called IBS. It can cause it in the muscles. Those often cause fibromyalgia. It can cause headaches, as it causes, if you have a bite and it becomes red and swollen and itchy, you see all the signs of histamine, don't you? The redness is increased blood flow. The swelling is lost into the tissues, and so leaking into the tissues to make it swollen. The itchiness is also the histamine release. So you see it all there in a little microcosm. And if you've got histamine being released all over your body, then you're going to have increased vasodilatation, which if you have that can cause a headache. It can cause redness of the face, rosacea, eczema, psoriasis of the skin. It can cause dermatographism, where the face becomes red, and you can write on the face and it will still stay, the writing will still stay there for 20 minutes. It can cause inflammation in the mouth and burning mouth syndrome. It can cause palpitations and low blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. And we think that is a mechanism centrally, that the mast cells release some of the chemicals into the brain, and that causes the loss of blood pressure monitoring, sort of regulation. So these poor patients can have POTS, where they feel very dizzy if they stand up too quickly. There's a big difference between their blood pressure lying down and standing up. And they can have IBS, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one person doesn't have to have all of them, and they don't have all the same symptoms all the time. So it might vary time to time what symptoms they're experiencing. One of the big features that is very common in everyone who has long COVID, as you will know, is brain fog. brain fog, and post-exertional fatigue. So if they exercise at all, they feel absolutely knackered for a few days. But it may not just be exercise. It might be that if you just do a little bit of housework or you load the dishwasher, you have to go and lie down because you're so knackered. And it might take a couple of days to recover. And this is not normal. And it's because of the overreaction of the mast cells. Unfortunately, what often happens is once they're set up to be super sensitive because of the virus, they then become sensitive to lots of other things that they really had been ignoring up until that time. So chemicals, perfumes, Wi-Fi, mobile phones, going from a hot room to a cold room, the temperature change, etc., can then trigger off the mast cells. So these poor patients, they saw family members who didn't have the MCAS get COVID and get better in a few days. And they started maybe to get a bit better, and then they took a nosedive and they just felt chronically ill with chronic inflammation. And then found very, very few people who could help them, which is really frustrating. Now, in answer to your question, sorry, it's a very long way of getting around to the answer to your question. Absolutely, there are what I found was when patients came to my clinic as long COVID patients, their histories absolutely 99.9% of the time showed that they had previously undiagnosed, untreated mast cell activation, which to varying degrees, and they had lived with that and thought themselves to be perfectly fit, healthy people. But I can't tolerate eating gluten, or I get lots of headaches, but all this sort of thing. I have IBS, but it's okay, it's sort of under control, and tonsillitis a lot when I was a child, etc. So it was very easy to see with their histories that actually they had a very typical mast cell history, indicating that they did have this propensity. And so therefore, all the same treatments for MCAS apply to the long COVID patients. And I must say they work very, very well. And I started treating them, as I say, on the 1st of November 2020. And I waited with bated breath for people's review appointments, which were 6 to 8 weeks after their initial appointment, to see how they were doing. And so many of the patients were saying, I'm going in the right direction. I'm feeling much better. It's made a huge difference. Even sometimes within days of starting the recommendations, they would feel much better and they could feel themselves going in the right direction. It's not a quick fix, though. Everybody's different. Everyone has it to different degrees. People have different, we think there are 50 different genetic variations in the KIT genes that determine how bad your MCAS may or may not be. And people will have different combinations of those. And some people's systems are more run down. They are coming from a lower base of health, so it takes longer to build up their system, improve their healing, reduce the inflammation, and so on. So the basic principles are, because everyone will be dying to know these now, is to have a low histamine diet, I'm afraid, because whilst your body recognizes that you need some histamine, too much is not good because of all the things I've just described. And you make something called diamine oxidase, we all do, in our stomachs. It's an enzyme, and it's one of the 2 enzymes that breaks down histamine. And I have found that in my patients with mast cell activation syndrome and therefore long COVID, a very, very high percentage of them are very poor at making this enzyme. So it's a bit of a double whammy for them. So when they don't make a lot of diamine oxidase enzyme that breaks down the histamine in the food and reduces the amount absorbed in the stomach and in the small intestine, when they don't make enough of that, we call that histamine intolerance. And I would say by far the majority of my MCAS long COVID patients are also histamine intolerant, which is really unfortunate because they're making too much histamine. So the last thing they need to do or want to do is absorb more histamine from their food. And their breakdown of histamine is very poor. So it's a double whammy. So we have to encourage the intake of histamine to be as low as possible. So low histamine diet. I encourage the paleo ketogenic diet, which is very helpful for reducing inflammation. I encourage people to do intermittent fasting for 18 hours if possible. So eating in a 6-hour window every day if you can, because that does a number of things which are really important. Have you heard about intermittent fasting as being helpful?
I've heard of intermittent fasting in a general health sense, and I know currently what I'm doing is seeing a doctor who has asked me to try a carnivore diet and basically to get into that ketosis state. He's
Yeah.
also wanting me to get to the point of doing a 3-day fast, which I think is ridiculous, but I've never fasted properly before. So I'm skipping breakfast mostly and having a coffee like around 12, 1, but I try not to have caffeine, obviously, too late in the day. But I know there are benefits to fasting. I think it's just for the general person, fasting is quite a scary thing. It's like, oh, no, I can't feel hungry and go to bed
Yeah.
hungry. I'm gonna,
It's funny, isn't it?
I've definitely lost a lot of weight the last month doing mainly carnivore. I am cheating here and there, but gluten, like you said, I know I'm allergic. Like I struggle with digesting that. I get very bloated.
Okay.
Interesting enough, I was having a steak and a very plain meal the other night, and I was feeling absolutely fine, and I had a glass of wine, and I felt like my chest suddenly got tight, and I thought,
Yeah.
that's weird. Is something in the wine, the tannins or the sugars, creating this asthmatic reaction? Yeah.
It's histamine, Chris. So let me tell you what's high in histamine, which has to be avoided at all costs. Okay, so it's tea and coffee, green tea, alcohol, chocolate, not white chocolate, but dark chocolate, brown chocolate. So alcohol, I'm afraid, is a big one. That's why the red wine would have been full of histamine. Tomatoes, avocados, spinach, oat milk, almond milk, anything processed, anything left over is a no-no. So food has to be hopefully organic if you can, freshly prepared, seasonal if you can. It's a much healthier way to eat. Freshly prepared and eaten, and you really, I drink water, peppermint tea. I'm drinking pine needle tea at the moment, which is very good as well for getting rid of the spike protein. So you want to put as little histamine in through your mouth as possible. There's a very good website for your listeners to look at. It's called whatthebleepcaniEat.com. And if you go on there, you can, it's a great website. A nutritional therapist in America put this together. She's in the Mast cell group that I'm part of. And she was so fed up of trying to find lists for different diets for her patients. She thought, I'm just going to put them all together on a big website. And she developed it with her husband, for which we are very grateful. So you can get on there a list of histamine-free foods and low histamine foods, and that comes to about 200, and it really is worth sticking to that as much as possible. The carnivore diet is great, and I've had various people reach out to me from all over the world telling me that they do the carnivore diet and they found that their inflammation has gone completely. They feel fantastic. And they really do recommend it as an anti-inflammatory. And of course, it's low histamine, as long as you're not eating leftover meat from the day before and you're preparing it freshly, then it's fantastic. So yeah, I've got people trying that. And as you say, it pushes you into ketosis, which is so important, and not having sugar, not having gluten. Gluten is very high in histamine. So low sugar, no gluten, low carb does help. So that's the diet, and then taking diamine oxidase before each meal is helpful, and that's called DAO, and that stands for diamine oxidase. And this is the enzyme that everybody is a little bit low in. Who, in my experience, has got MCAS and long COVID. Not all of them, but the vast majority are low in diamine oxidase. And the higher your histamine, of course, the faster any diamine oxidase you do have gets used up. So then you look like you're deficient because it's just as fast as you're making it, it's gone, working on the histamine. So those are important. Then antihistamines are very important. They sit on the mast cell and they block the receptors, which stops the spike protein getting into the mast cell, both from the vaccine and from the virus. So very important. Plus, they block the receptors in the cells, which are going to react to the histamine. So you can calm down the, you're not going to reduce the histamine release, but you are going to reduce the histamine effects. And classically, we ask people to try a type 1 antihistamine and to walk through the different antihistamines. So that would be loratadine, cetirizine, fexofenadine, to try each one for 2 weeks, but to take them in the proper doses. So on the boxes, it'll say 10 milligrams loratadine once a day. Well, that's not enough. You need to take it twice a day as a minimum maintenance kind of dose. And if you were having a flare, you could take it 3 times a day. Or if a severe flare, you could actually take it up to 4 times a day, and that's the safest maximum dose. And that's according to the European Society of Dermatology. And similarly for cetirizine and fexofenadine, maximum safe dose 180 milligrams up to 4 times a day for a few days, and then go back down to 2 or 3 times a day. I encourage them to walk through each one of those for 2 weeks. And at the end of the 2 weeks to think, do I feel better? Don't I feel better? And if they think, I'm not sure, that means they don't. Because when you do, you know, and discard that one and then try another one. If the first one you try is great, then stick with it. Don't bother to try the others. If you think, oh God, I feel so much better on this, this is amazing, then stay on it. And then add a type 2 antihistamine, which is something like famotidine, 20 milligrams to 40 milligrams twice a day, or nizatidine, 150 to 300 milligrams twice a day. And that will block the type 2 histamine receptors. And I've seen some miracles for people when they have, if it's the right person. Now, the important thing to remember is we're all individual, and there are lots of complexities and unpredictabilities. So what works in one person isn't necessarily going to work in another person, and we have to be very patient and try things out in a stepwise fashion. If the type 1 antihistamine is good, you keep it, and then you add a type 2, and then you assess that over 2 weeks to see whether you think that's helping. And if it isn't, then double the dose and see if it's better at that double dose. And if it's not, then stop it or try a different type of type 2. Then the third thing that we would recommend is a mast cell stabilizer, such as ketotifen. Now, ketotifen is a weak type 1 antihistamine, but it's a very strong mast cell stabilizer. For those who can't get access to ketotifen because it's prescription only, then you can try quercetin. Quercetin is a mast cell stabilizer too, and that can be very effective. You take 500 milligrams 3 times a day. And then after that, we then layer on maybe something like LDN, which is low-dose naltrexone. And there's a very good website I'd encourage everyone to look at called ldnresearchtrust.org. And that has got a lot of information about low-dose naltrexone and its where it works and how it works and so on. And it can be very, very effective. You have to remember with low-dose naltrexone, it's probably best in the sublingual form, in the liquid drop form. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is you start on a very, very tiny dose and you build up very slowly. Every week you go up a little bit. And you have to remember that maybe the smaller dose is your sweet spot and it's better than going up. And you go up to 4.5 milligrams a day. But it might be that 0.5 milligrams a day is the best one for you. So you just have to be mindful of that when you're doing it. And that also, it can also take 4 weeks to 6 months, even a year, to really, really show its value. So it's worth persevering with. And I've seen some incredible improvements in people on LDN. And if there's time at the end, I'll tell you 1 or 2 of these stories. The other thing that I'm very keen on is mycotherapy, and that's medicinal mushrooms. And there's a Spanish company called hifastaterra.com, or .co.uk actually is the one we use, but I think they've got a global website too. And they check everything is organic and no pesticides or insecticides have been used. And there are 2 in particular that I like to use because they are very immunoregulatory and they dampen down the immune response in the body. So they calm down the mast cells, reduce histamine release, and improve sleep. One of them is anti-cancer as well. So I usually recommend myco-5 and myco-sol. Sol is the sunshine mushroom, which is a mast cell stabilizer and reduces the release of histamine and inflammation. And myco-5 has got 5 different mushrooms, myco-sol being one of them, chaga being another, which is very anti-cancer. And then it's got reishi in there, which helps you relax, improves your sleep, is an analgesic. So that's good stuff. And the other two, one of them, and I forget, there's shiitake, mitake, I think, and forget which one, but one of them is can treat mycotoxins. And mycotoxins are something else that we look for in the patient, because so many of us have been exposed to mold at some point in our lives. And that will mean that we have mycotoxins still in our body unless it's been treated or we've been detoxified from it. Anything that is a trigger for the mast cells needs to be excluded, basically. So that could be mycotoxins, that could be food, that could be the spike protein. And the spike protein, both of the virus and of the vaccine, is very, very good at pressing all the buttons on the mast cells and releasing the histamine and the other cytokines and causing havoc in the poor patient. So that's the other thing we need to do, is clear the spike protein. And we do that with something called augmented NAC. And augmented NAC, I'm hoping, is very soon going to be available in South Africa. And it is ordinary NAC, which is a supplement called N-acetylcysteine, can denature a very small percentage of the spike protein, and then the body can clear it out, because this is a foreign protein and our body has not developed a way of clearing it. So unfortunately, it just stays in the body and maybe accumulating, if because we don't know how long people's bodies are going to keep making it for when they've been vaccinated, and how much they're going to make. And it probably varies person to person, and it will vary which vaccine they had. Some had, Pfizer, for example, has, I think, 13 billion pieces of messenger RNA per dose. So that's going to set up in the cells and make trillions of spike protein. AstraZeneca had 50 billion. That's no longer available. And Moderna has 100 billion per dose. So that's going to make an awful lot of spike protein in the body. And we need to clear it out. And they found that if they took ordinary NAC, it cleared out 2, 3, 4%. But if they augmented it, doing some quantum physics on it, it actually denatured 99.8% of extracellular spike protein. And then the liver clears it out and you pee it out in your urine. So it's really important to do this and to clear it out, get rid of it. And you do that by taking one every day for a couple of days, then make it one twice a day for a few days, and then one 3 times a day for 3 months, and then go back down to one a day or one twice a day. And people are noticing big differences. There's a very good website called zerospike.org. People can look at the testimonials on there, and there's the scientific data on there. So it's, I found that really useful and helpful with my patients. Because some long COVID patients and vaccine injured can be also not just affected physically, but mentally. And I've had 3 or 4 patients who've become totally suicidal with the vaccine. Immediately after taking the vaccine, they've become suicidal. So it's done something to their brains big time. And certainly some people have said they've had like a personality change. They've noticed that they're dampened down. They're not their normal, cheerful, upbeat self. And I've had a few who, when they take the augmented NAC, they say, "I'm back again. It's great. It's me. I feel so much better, mentally as well as physically." So that, and you get that from augmentednac.com as this where you can book it, order it online. But I don't think it's in South Africa yet. But it is in America, other parts of Europe as well as England. And then the last thing that I would really recommend, well, not the last thing, but another thing I would really recommend to all my patients is an ARC microcurrent device. And this is fascinating. This is a little device that you wear on a cuff around your arm or under your knee or around your ankle. And you can wear it any time of the day or night, so you can sleep with it. And you switch it on and it gives you a microcurrent, which you cannot feel, and it will do it for 3 hours. It has different programs. One of the program is set specifically to reduce inflammation in the body. Now, I've just been telling you all about all the inflammation causing all the symptoms. So this is really fantastic. So it's set to reduce inflammation. And the other one that we recommend, so program 1 and program 2, is set to promote healing and homeostasis in the body. And it goes through 4.5 million different combinations of voltages to achieve that, which is incredible. You can't feel it when it's on. You don't feel it at all. But we are electrical beings. We're 2 million volts walking around attached to a few cells. And in particular, this device boosts ATP production, which is energy made in the cells. I don't know if you know about mitochondria, Chris. Do you know? Have you come across mitochondria? I'm sure you have. Yeah. So
I have, yeah.
yeah. So mitochondria are amazing. They are just incredible. If you took all your mitochondria out and put them in a pile, it would be 32% of your body weight. That's how important they are, right? And that's how many we have of them. And every day they make ATP, which is like petrol in the tank. You know, they're making the petrol that we need to live. And every day it's used up as fast as they can make it. The demand is so high because we have 100,000 different chemical processes happening in each cell per second. So this is a massive requirement of energy. And the amount of ATP that's actually made every day by the mitochondria comes to 70 to 80 kilograms. If you could weigh it all and it didn't get used up straight away, it would be 70 to 80 kilograms, which just shows you the scale of the thing, really. So having fit, healthy mitochondria is super important. And we need that for all of our processes, but also for our body to heal. And unfortunately, if your mitochondria are compromised, so everyone who's on statins is compromised. Everyone who's on omeprazole, a PPI, has compromised mitochondria. And then your mitochondria are not going to be producing as much ATP as you need. So then the body's going to prioritize the essential things that need to be done, and things like healing and reducing inflammation are going to be put to the back of the queue, unfortunately. So it's very important that we use anything. And this little support the mitochondria. This little microcurrent device supports the mitochondria and boosts ATP production 3 to 5-fold, which is extraordinary. So a lot of professional athletes use them. Rugby players, football players, athletes, they use them to help their recovery after training or a game, and also to help them heal if they have any injuries. So this is a device that I recommend to everybody. So I'm going to put information on my website about it shortly, so people will be able to look it up a bit more. And we'll also be able to give them a discount code on there. So it's worth looking at that. So that is the mainstay of treatment for MCAS, but also for mast cell activation and long COVID. And also for long COVID and vaccine injured many. The other thing I would add in for the long COVID patients is ivermectin. I'm sure you know about ivermectin. Ivermectin is an antiparasitic, antiviral, very, very safe to take. It's anti-cancer, it's anti-inflammatory, it's a mast cell stabilizer. It has literally 20 different biochemical processes that it can instigate or act on. There's an article in the Nature publication that talks about all of these different mechanisms. So it's really, really amazing. And it's very safe to take, and you take it with a meal so that it's absorbed best. And the doses are 0.2 to 0.6 milligrams per kilogram body weight. So for somebody like me, the 0.2 milligrams per kilogram is 12 milligrams of ivermectin, and that would be daily with a meal. And that's the sort of smallest dose. And certainly when patients come with long COVID, it's worth them trying it for 3 or 4 weeks every day to see if it has an effect. And then if it does, to carry on using it either intermittently, like a couple of times a week, or to use it certainly when they have a flare. I've seen some miraculous recovery in the vaccine injured using ivermectin. And when they stop taking the ivermectin, their symptoms all come back. And they could be extremely debilitating and life-changing symptoms. But when they take the ivermectin, they're okay and they can function. So it has a very important role to play. Doesn't work in everybody, doesn't make a difference in everybody, but it's just another tool in our toolbox.
Mm,
Yeah.
incredible. Well, Dr. Piers, what are your thoughts on things like the McCullough protocol and other proteolytic enzymes? So your nattokinase, serrapeptase,
Yeah.
lumbrokinase. I'm sure you've heard of those protocols. Yeah.
Yes. And certainly patients who have live blood analysis done, it shows that there's microclotting everywhere. And there's a fantastic German doctor, Beat Jaeger, who has got apheresis, and there are various apheresis clinics around in Greece and various other places around the world. And that certainly can help patients to have their blood filtered and get rid of the clots. Most of my patients are on aspirin. I don't use nattokinase because it can increase histamine. So lumbrokinase is better for this group of patients. Some are put on clopidogrel as well, and that can certainly make a big difference. So yeah, that is the anticoagulant type, of drugs. It's worth trying. Definitely, that helps too. Yes, you're right. Mm.
I can share with you. Sorry, I did the microclot testing with the team here in Stellenbosch, where I stay currently. Just happened to be quite close to them, which is great because I know a lot of people can't do that testing yet. Found the microclots, found the hyperactivated platelets, did 10 months of triple therapy. So your clopidogrel and 2 Eliquis daily with your Pantacid, obviously to lie in the stomach. I guess my concern, obviously, with the Pantacid is if you're lying in the stomach, I was worried, like, what am I not absorbing with nutrients and minerals and things if I'm lining my stomach to help with the side effects of the blood thinners? It was very difficult. I found it helped me. I know there's blood vessel damage. I found there's endothelial debris in my reports as well. So unfortunately, I found it very expensive. And I did something called a spike antibody test, an IgG. I don't know what that term means, IgG, but my levels were 18,000 plus, 6 weeks apart, both times, and showing that my body is still making spike, or there's just this viral reservoir, viral persistence. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I've realized, like a lot of your patients and yourself are probably realizing, is that it's the spike protein production that's like probably the root cause. I can treat my endothelial lining and fix my blood vessels, but if I don't treat the spike and maybe these mast cells, like you say, these clots are going to keep forming and keep damaging my blood vessels. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. So 2 of the mainstays of treatment are going to be to calm the mast cells down, reduce the effects of the mast cells on the body, but also to get rid of the spike protein, which is why the autophagy is important. The autophagy is where cells implode, basically, and are destroyed if they are slightly pathological, if they have got spike protein in them, if they've got precancerous cells, etc., then the body clears them out. And it's very clever. The body will recycle bits that are healthy. It doesn't get rid of the whole cell. It recycles some of it, and it gets rid of the bits that it doesn't like. And autophagy has been switched off by the spike protein. And therefore, it's important that we switch it on again. And that's why the intermittent fasting is very helpful. And then we want to clear that spike out, which is why I'm very interested in augmented NAC, because I hadn't come across anything apart from Medicinals 9, which does it a little as well. And I believe that the company who make Medicinals 9 have also developed one that gets rid of the intracellular spike protein and puts it into the bloodstream. And then the augmented NAC gets rid of the extracellular spike protein and will make it pass through the liver out into the urine. So I think a combination of those two would be perfect. And together with some anticoagulant therapy of some description. And as you say, most people can't afford to go and have the apheresis regularly, etc. But we just need to attack it from all directions, really. Release, get rid of some of these triggers, and the spike protein is definitely one of them. One of the things that I also encourage patients to do is, when they've had COVID, we now know from Carlo Brogna's work in Italy that it stays in the gut and it goes into the bacteria of the gut, and it just finds a little home there and it keeps multiplying up. So we have to clear it out from the gut, and you do that with taking a short course of antibiotics, literally just 5 days of azithromycin, or what are the others, streptomycin. There's 5 anyway that it's sensitive to, and it's worth doing that. Obviously, you worry about your microbiome, and that's the other thing, that the virus and the vaccine, the spike protein of either, destroys the microbiome. And 70% of our immune system is in our gut. Our microbiome is incredibly important. So getting that balance back is super important. So the spike seems to destroy lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, and we need to build those up again. They make short chain fatty acids, which are very protective of the mucous lining of the gut and are very carcinogenic. So they stop carcinogens from stimulating cancer in the gut. And so what I suggest to people is they take sodium butyrate, 300 milligrams every day, which will be the short chain fatty acid to protect their gut, whilst they build up their lactobacillus and bifidobacterium again with probiotics and prebiotics, so that we get some immediate protection, but we're also building up the right, happy, good, protective bacteria. Because without exception, in all my patients who have long COVID or have been vaccine injured, when we do a stool analysis, they're right down on those. So, and it all starts with gut. So diet, gut, get your diet right, get the gut right, take the antihistamines, support your system, do the ARC, do the myco mushrooms, do some anticoagulants, and the augmented NAC to clear that spike, and it will. People get better. They get better, and the low dose naltrexone is amazing. It can be incredible. I have one lady who'd had psoriasis from the age of 6, and then she had psoriatic arthritis, and her doctor had said to her, "We're going to give you methotrexate, which is an immune suppressant, to dampen down your arthritis, the arthritis, and make you have less inflammation in your joints." And they said, "So to prepare for that, we're going to give you lots of vaccines to boost your immune system, because once you're on an immunosuppressant, you might be vulnerable to infections." So they gave her 12 vaccines in 1 year. 5 of them were COVID. 3 were HPV. I mean, it was and she became sicker and sicker and sicker, until when she came to see me, she could only eat 2 foods. She was eating chicken and bananas. And she was having an anaphylactic shock to type reaction to virtually everything else. She was having to try a new food outside of the casualty department, so that if she had an anaphylactic shock, she could walk into the casualty department. It became so stressful for her. She was so unwell, she had to move out of her family home and live with her parents whilst her children stayed with her husband. It was tragic. And she, anyway, we worked together, and we gradually calmed down her system, which had become sensitive to even supplements. She couldn't even take those. And then I introduced low dose naltrexone, And 4 days after starting the tiniest dose of low-dose naltrexone, she emailed me to say, "You won't believe this, but on day 4, I've woken up and 95% of my psoriasis, which I've had since the age of 6, has gone." On day 4 of low-dose naltrexone. Just amazing and life-changing. So,
That's
yeah, and
incredible.
another lady with long COVID, when she went on to low-dose naltrexone, when she'd been on it for 4 weeks, she suddenly found she didn't get post-exertional malaise. And she said it was like a switch had been switched off. Suddenly she could do things and not be exhausted and have to lie down for half a day to recover. And that made a huge difference to her. And then when she'd been on it a year, 12 months, she said she just felt so well, like it had really settled down her mast cells and her immune system. And that was amazing. Oh, the other aspect, Chris, which I've forgotten to mention, is a lot of the patients who I see have had some kind of childhood trauma. So not only have they been exposed to mold, maybe Lyme's disease, maybe Epstein-Barr virus, which all get reactivated by the vaccine and by the COVID infection, but maybe they've also had childhood traumas. And it's very important to deal with that too, because that has contributed to their mast cells and their immune system being on red alert the whole time, and made it overreactive because it's trying to protect them. And so we need to work with their brain as well.
Element. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we are not just bodies. We have, you know, physical health, mental health, and spiritual health. And I think we should bear all of those in mind and address all of them. And then recently I came across this, and you probably know all about this, but this fantastic treatment people can do for themselves at home, called EFT, which is emotional freedom technique, and it's tapping. And there's a very good website called eftinternational.org that I encourage anybody to have a look at. And you can download a manual which teaches you how to do it, or you can join classes, you can watch videos and so on. And it can be incredibly powerful. And it retrains the part of your brain that is on fight or flight. And it can really tone it down to make it calm down so that everything is just a little bit more, you know, chilled and doesn't overreact so easily. So that is also an important consideration. And I'm very excited to hear about psilocybin being used clinically in clinical settings in Australia, and in some parts of America and in the Netherlands, to treat patients with intractable PTSD, but also with traumas. And it can switch that part of your brain off, reliving the trauma and things like that. So that can be really helpful.
Is that that name you just mentioned? I won't try say because it sounds complicated. Is that similar to an SNRI or an SSRI that's blocking receptors in your brain?
No, it's actually a recreational drug that's illegal, but it has been granted permission by the TGA in Australia to run studies. And they're running the studies in the Netherlands. And I know that Professor Nutt in the UK and London is also doing a study treating various different depression can be treated this way, PTSD can be treated, childhood trauma. Very, very interesting, very interesting. Addictions can be treated like this. So that's smoking, alcohol, gambling. Any addiction can be treated, and it's very quick and easy, and you know, it has to be done properly in a clinical setting and a safe environment. So I'm not suggesting anyone should go and try this themselves at home at all, but it's very encouraging. The results they've had so far we're cautiously encouraged by, and they are gathering evidence and clinical data to enable people to train in doing this and to do it safely for patients. So very interesting development there. Mm.
Thank you, Dr. Piers. I've really enjoyed our chat this evening. It's been incredible amounts of wealth of information, I'd say. A lot of the words I like, things like your cytokines, all of those medical things, I don't understand or know, but I'm going to put your link to your website below. And for the listeners, I think they'll really enjoy this conversation and just appreciate your insights into mast cell activation, histamine intolerance, all of those. I guess very, I don't know if they specialize, but I guess they are specialist medicine. Like you say, you didn't learn a lot of these things when you were studying. So I find it fascinating, and I will add your links below to your website and to your socials as well. Thank you so much again for your time, Dr. Piers. I really appreciate it.
It's a complete pleasure. If it helps one person, then I'm really happy.
I love it. I like that. I love that approach. I have the same thing with the YouTube channel as well. Like if I've given one person hope to just carry on and to get better one day, that's enough for me. Yeah, incredible.
And I see people getting better all the time. So it's important to have the hope and to know that if you follow the roadmap as closely as you can, that you will go in the right direction and you will get better. Very important. Yeah.
Incredible.
Lovely.
Thank you, Tina. Dr. Piers. I won't call you Tina yet.
Yeah, you can. It's my pleasure. Thank you, Chris, for doing what you're doing, because this is a real service to people, isn't it? It's really helpful. Lovely. Okay.
And thank you. Have a great evening.
Yes, you too. Bye-bye.